Hi everyone, it's Lauren. I hope you're all doing really well. Today I'm going to be talking through what I've read in the second part of November. Not very many books, I'm afraid. I'm currently reading quite a few. So I've got a few to talk to you about and also some of my reading plans, just in general. Before I get stuck in, however, I am doing Vlogmas this year, which means I'm going to be uploading a video, mostly vlogs, but some other Christmassy videos as well, every other day in December. So we're going to have 12 videos overall up until the big day. And one of those videos next weekend is going to be a gift guide. I'm going to try and get that up as soon as I can. A lot of it bookish, but some of it not as well. But what I'd really love is to hear from you guys if you have anybody that you'd really like to buy for, if you need some recommendations for someone who has a specific taste, someone who really wants a very fast-paced plot, someone who doesn't read that much, someone who's into a specific author or anything like that, then leave me your requests in the comments below and I will see what I can do to get you a recommendation of what to buy for that person. It can be as vague or as specific as you like. I'll do my best. I've not done a gift guide before because I always struggle to know what to buy other people myself. I think I panic a little bit, but this year, because I've been doing all my Christmas shopping quite early, I've been very organised and I've got some ideas and I've got some brands and shops that I'd really like to share as well. So my main task for the second part of November has been to get through Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy, which I finally have. I'm so pleased. I finished it like last night. I was like, yes! I can now include this in my video. This is about a young woman called Tess Durbeyfield who lives in Hardy's kind of fictionalised county of Wessex, which is in the south of England. She's from a reasonably poor family, but her father finds out that their family is actually descended from a much more noble line called d'Urberville, and the name has just been corrupted throughout the years and they've kind of fallen from grace, have no money left of course. But this inspires her mother to make some connections with a family who live fairly nearby, whose name is d'Urberville, and they send Tess to them to say, look, you can tell them that you're related and you're kin and maybe they'll give you some money, basically, is the idea. This branch of the D'Urbervilles actually isn't related to the Durbeyfield family at all, but Tess goes along following what her mother tells her to do, meets Alec d'Urberville, and there's all kinds of awful things that happen after that. This is very much about Tess's downfall and corruption of innocence. It's often a difficult book to read and more often a very frustrating book to read. It made me so angry on Tess's behalf because she really is just so young and naive and she doesn't know very much about the world, and she does what she thinks will make her parents happy. She doesn't really know how to deal with someone as strong and powerful as Alec d'Urberville. She doesn't really know how to hold her own and how to say no to him. And because she's seen so little of the world really, she struggles to kind of know her own mind and stand up for herself in any kind of given situation. Even later when she meets Angel Clare, who she falls in love with, she struggles to be her own person around him or assert herself really, and she's very ashamed of her past. She very much feels like she just has such low self-esteem, bless her, and she really feels like some of these men are so powerful or so good or whatever, and so whatever they're saying must be correct, and she just doesn't really know. Her thoughts flitter from whoever she's talking to really. She doesn't really have a strong firm hold on what's right and what she should do, and because she's very powerless because of her economic situation and the fact she's a woman and the fact she's very young, it's just exacerbated by this, and she's really just tossed around between jobs, between men, between like people more powerful than her, and she's a victim of misfortune in general situations as well. I really liked how Hardy wrote Tess because although in some ways I suppose he's quite patronising towards her because she's so naive, I just really felt that when like Alec d'Urberville is approaching her and coming on to her and sort of coaxing her to give him a kiss or whatever, she just doesn't know what to do, and she's so young and she doesn't want to do it, but she doesn't even understand why she feels uncomfortable with it. And I thought that was quite astute. It really reminded me of how I felt when I was like a teenage girl and feeling uncomfortable in certain situations but not even knowing yourself why you feel uncomfortable and then not really understanding how to get yourself out of it. So I thought that was really well done. I did think the pacing in this book was a little bit strange, and that's because there's lots of things that happen that are really quite dramatic. There's sexual violence, there's murder, there's death, there's all kinds of things happening, and those very dramatic things seem to take up maybe a sentence or two in the book, whereas we spend a lot of time with the farm life and the agricultural year and what Tess is doing, and like with her milking cows, for example, or working in the fields. And we get a lot of time talking about the landscape and the seasons. And it's almost as though Hardy ascribes the amount of time in the book for the amount of physical time that is happening. So even if something awful happens, if that took a day, that will just be a paragraph. And then we'll have chapters of over the summer months, for example, when nothing much is really happening in terms of plot. So it felt a little bit strange. It's also of its time in the way that, you know, quite acts of violence, for example, are not very explicit in this book at all. They're heavily implied, but to the point where you might even miss that something's happened. And when something is a turning point in a character's life, I feel that warrants a few more lines. And I think it's just not a way a book would be plotted these days. I think this isn't how you would approach this story now. You wouldn't necessarily spend such little time on those events and such a great amount of time describing the weather. But it was really enjoyable to read. It was very readable, as much as it is so frustrating at the way the men treat Tess, at the way her mistakes are held up against her forever. And any mistake a man does is just, it can just be brushed off or forgiven or whatever, and it's just horrific, the kind of consequences that she has for actions that are really out of her control, and the fact that it haunts her through her life forever. It's very sad in that sense. But yeah, definitely glad I gave it a go. I feel the pacing let it down just at the end, especially when there's a lot of things that need to be tied together. There's a lot of dramatic events happening, and it felt a little bit like, where is this going? And it didn't really feel like it was tied up properly for me at the end. But I think the heart of the story itself, I really loved. I also listened to Is Not About the Burqa on audiobook, which is a series of essays by many different Muslim women and edited by Mariam Khan. And I absolutely loved this collection. I thought the essays themselves were brilliant, and I loved the audiobook as well, because each of the contributors read their own essays, and I think that really brought something to it, and I loved just hearing all these different voices. This was our pick for the Feminist Orchestra Book Club for November and December, which is why I read it, and I'm just so pleased that I did. I really loved it. I'll leave a link to our Goodreads group if you'd like to join in with the Feminist Orchestra. Of course, we are nearing the end of 2020 now, and we normally take a break in January and February, and we will announce the next 5 books for 2021 then. But you still have time to read any of the books that you want, if you like, and then join in on the discussions. But we still have a month for this book, which is actually very short. I think the audiobook itself was about 6.5 hours, so you could definitely fly through this. There are so many things I loved about this book, and it's difficult for me to almost name them without just listing all of the essays and what each of them was about, because I think it's rare to find a book of essays where the perspectives are so different, and yet you feel like you agree with all of them. Like, I really see where everybody is coming from, and that's what works so brilliantly. It is a variety, a cacophony of voices, which is the whole point, that Muslim women are not one stereotype. There's so many different people and so many different experiences, and they're not defined by the fact that they are Muslim, that they are women, and depending on what their cultural background is. And one of the aspects I thought was interesting hearing these different opinions on was the idea of what representation meant, like in the media. For example, having models in hijabs on fashion websites, like, what does that mean? Is that helpful? Or is it just the idea of someone with a hijab, and you've got a picture of her, and that's fine, and now you've ticked a box, and you don't actually care what any kind of Muslim woman has to say. It's not really about her, it's just about having the image of her. There was equally another essay which was talking about the idea of hijab being about modesty, and about how that feels like incongruent with the fashion industry, which is kind of marketing beauty and things like this to young girls. So there's so many different opinions on it, and that's what I enjoyed. Each person arguing it, kind of like, oh yeah, well, I see that point of view. I also particularly liked the exploration, which came up time and again in these essays, of the idea that feminism and Islam don't come together, which everybody has said absolutely do, but the minute you speak up about it, you're dealing with it from so many different perspectives. So if you talk about cultural sexism, for example, within Muslim communities in the UK, or within Pakistani communities, whatever it is, then you get people on the outside, white people saying, oh, that's just because you're Muslim. So it's because, and they're being racist towards that community. And it's saying, oh, yeah, well, Muslim men are just backward and oppress their women. So you can't have a conversation about that without it turning into an idea that you're attacking your own community or you're getting the racists on your side. And if you're talking about sexism kind of in the wider community or the wider patriarchy, then people can just go, oh, well, you're a Muslim, so that's ridiculous. Like, you're just wearing your hijab and you're oppressing yourself. And it's like you can't win and you can't have nuanced discussions about any of these issues, because the fact that there is patriarchy and there is sexism is just something that exists globally in society. And it doesn't matter which culture you're from, although some cultures are going to have different elements of it to others. And it was just interesting to hear these women talking about the fact that, of course, there's sexism within like the Islamic community. There's sexism in the world. It's not like Islamic problem, and it's specifically for the religion, it's certainly not a problem. And I really enjoyed all the different perspectives. These women are from different countries, different families, they live in different parts of the world. And the fact that the religion itself can be used and distorted by different cultures. There is a difference, which you can see in all religions, between what the religion at its core itself is teaching and how people choose to use that teaching, either in the way it was intended or to further their own beliefs. And this especially gets tied up with cultural practices as well, which is different. That's separate from a religion. A culture, being very conservative or traditional, is very different to what the religion is actually teaching. And that's not unique to Islam. It's in all religions. You see it all over the globe. And I thought it was so interesting hearing some of these different women's stories about how they grew up and how they identify, and whether they thought they could be feminist and be Muslim as well, whether those two things were compatible. There were just so many aspects of the whole collection that I loved, and I think that is rare. When you have multiple writers, it's difficult to make a collection feel coherent, and this absolutely did. And as I've said, shy of just listing every single topic that was mentioned in these essays, I can't really go into more detail other than just to say, please read it. It is brilliant, and it really encapsulates the reason that we need to listen to other people and hear these voices, and people talking about their own experiences need to be where we get our information from, rather than it being based on stereotype or being like, oh, it's okay, we've got kind of like brownish people in the government, so we're done, that's okay. And we've ticked that representation box, rather than actually listening to people, understanding their experiences, and having them part of the conversation. So unfortunately, those are the only two books that I finished in the second part of November. I also have my November wrap-up part 1, which you can go and watch if you haven't already. But I am currently reading War and Peace as part of my Patreon book club, which is going to be, which was October, November and December, and I'm still like really at the beginning of it, but I was sort of saving it for December. So that's that's my plan for kind of the rest of the year, just to try and finish War and Peace. Although I did start reading Brooklyn yesterday as well, and I won't talk about this because I'm like 3 pages in, like I've really just started it. But I'm going to try and read this, I think, as well before the end of the year. I do have some more things on my TBR, which was The Robber Bride by Margaret Atwood, Where the Crawdads Sing, North and South, and A Thousand Splendid Suns. So they were all things I wanted to read before the end of the year, and I'm not sure. I'm just really not sure, because obviously December will be quite busy, as well as me doing Vlogmas, which I'm really looking forward to, but it'll just take up a bit of time. So we'll see what I get done at the end of the year. I'll do my wrap up in January. You can see how far I've got. Hopefully at least War and Peace, which sounds like a low bar, but it is War and Peace, so that's still giving myself quite a lot to read. So that's my plan for the rest of the year. I'd love to know if you've read either of these books that I've just been talking to you about, and just generally what you've been reading and how you've been finding reading at the moment. I'm finding myself extremely distracted by general life things, but Christmas and COVID do not help on top of what's normally happening at this time of year. So yeah, I'd love to hear how you've been doing, how your reading's been affected, and I'll see you in my next video.